The air in the surveillance van was a toxic, stratified history of the last 36 hours. At the bottom, clinging to the cold, corrugated metal floor, was the damp, almost primordial scent of Bosphorus mud from their boots. A constant reminder of the city's ancient, rich, watery soul. Above that, a thick, suffocating stratum of stale tobacco smoke. The acrid ghost of countless Belomorcanal papyrusi, the cheapest, harshest cigarettes known to man, smoked by the van's junior signals technician Yuri, down to their long cardboard filters. Higher still, the sharp, electric tang of ozone and hot plastic, a byproduct of the overworked server racks and cryptographic signal boosters that turned the cramped space into a furnace, even as a relentless November wind howled outside, rattling the van on its suspension. And at the very top, tainting everything, was the lingering ghost of burnt coffee from a pot that had been stewing since yesterday. A sludge Dmitry Volkov privately called the Zarya Blend, bitter and black as the operations it fueled. Dmitry Volkov, commander of FSB Special Operations Unit Zarya 7, breathed it all in without registering a single molecule. His senses, honed by 2 decades of clandestine warfare from the pulverized ruins of Grozny to the manicured, deceitful suburbs of London, were focused outward. They were channeled through a dense web of silicon, copper, and encrypted microwave links into a gilded ballroom half a kilometer away. The Ford Transit, its once white panels hidden beneath the faded, peeling livery of an Istanbul commercial laundry service, Boğaziçi Çamaşır Hane, was his command post, his chapel, his universe. The bank of 8 monitors arranged in a gentle curve before him was his stained glass window onto the world of his prey. A nerve in his left eyelid began a frantic, staccato dance, a familiar telegram from a nervous system pushed far beyond its operational limits. He ignored it. He ignored the dull, grinding ache in his C7 vertebra. A permanent souvenir from a piece of Chechen shrapnel in '99 that liked to remind him of its presence during long periods of stillness. He ignored the damp chill that seeped through the van's thin floor, a consequence of parking for too long in the deep, permanent shadow of the ancient aqueduct of Valens, where the November winds funneled and howled like hungry wolves. All that existed, all that mattered, was the primary image on the central 4K display. It was a live feed, relayed through a daisy chain of 3 encrypted line-of-sight transmitters. From a micro camera no larger than a grain of rice, artfully concealed within the deep blue enamel of a cufflink on a waiter's uniform. The waiter, an asset codenamed Orpheus, cultivated over 2 years with a careful mixture of blackmail involving a gambling debt to the wrong people and greed for a life beyond his grasp, was pouring champagne. His hand was a surgeon's, steady and precise, a testament to Volkov's assessment of his character. A coward, but a professional one. The Golden Liquid, a 1998 Dom Perignon, the mission manifest had noted with dry, almost insulting precision, cascaded without a whisper into a hand-cut crystal flute. Through the shimmering heat rising from massive silver platters of roasted lamb and saffron pilaf, the target finally came into focus. Aslan Basayev, the man they called the Wolf of Grozny, the Butcher of Beslan, was laughing. It was a sound Volkov knew intimately, a sound he had studied on countless grainy audio intercepts until it was burned into his auditory cortex. It wasn't a laugh of joy or mirth. It was a harsh, guttural bark, the sound a predator makes when it is pleased with its kill. It was the sound that had preceded the order to execute hostages at the Moscow theater, the sound that had echoed through the school gymnasium in Beslan as the bombs were wired to the basketball hoops. Here, in the opulent splendor of the Shuran Palace, a restored Ottoman marvel serving as a wedding gift to the daughter of a Turkish shipping magnate with convenient political amnesia. It was the sound of a man who believed he had outrun God, history, and the long, vengeful arm of the Russian state. A man who thought his sins could be laundered as easily as his money, washed clean by the very waters that separated Europe and Asia. Basayev had traded his mud-caked camouflage for a tailored Zegna suit of midnight blue, the fine wool sitting awkwardly on his brutish peasant frame. His ever-present Kalashnikov had been replaced by the delicate stem of the champagne flute. But to Volkov, and to the silent, unseen network of the Federal Security Service of the Russian Federation, he was not a reformed businessman enjoying his retirement. He was a ghost who had clawed his way out of his own grave, a debt that had come screamingly due. Tonight, Zarya 7 was the collection agency. Their job, however, was not simply to put him back in the ground. This was not an assassination. An assassination would be a messy, vulgar affair, a primitive solution to a complex problem. A high-velocity 9x39mm round from a VSS Vintorez in the heart of Istanbul, on the sovereign soil of a NATO member, would be an undeclared act of war. The diplomatic fallout would be a firestorm, undoing years of delicate geopolitical maneuvering in Syria and the Black Sea. No. The directive from the Kremlin, delivered by a man known only as the General, in a sterile, soundproofed room in the Lubyanka, was far more ambitious, far more cruel. They wanted Basayev alive. They wanted to strip mine his psyche for intelligence on the new generation of Caucasian jihadists, funded by Gulf money and radicalized online. They wanted to parade his broken form before the world's cameras, to put him on trial in a glass box where the mothers of Beslan could watch him wither day by day. They wanted to dismantle the myth, piece by bloody piece, until all that was left was a pathetic old man, choked by the ashes of his own legend. To achieve this, Volkov's team had to perform an act of operational sorcery, a surgical extraction from the heart of a fortress, a ghost slipping through a room of sentinels. Volkov manipulated a small, sensitive joystick, and the cufflink camera zoomed, the digital image pixelating for a moment before the processors sharpened it. Basayev was a bull, his thick neck straining the starched white collar of his shirt. A jagged scar, a souvenir from a Russian Spetsnaz bayonet in the First Chechen War, bisected his right eyebrow and vanished into the coarse, gray-flecked terrain of his beard. His eyes, even on the degraded feed, were chips of obsidian, never still, constantly scanning, assessing threats even here among supposed friends. He was a predator at rest, but a predator nonetheless. Paranoia was the armor that had kept him alive for 2 decades, while his contemporaries were systematically vaporized by Hellfire missiles in the mountains, poisoned with polonium-laced tea in London, or shot in the back of the head in the tidy suburbs of Vienna and Berlin. His security was a masterclass in overlapping fields of fire and suspicion. He never ate food he had not personally seen prepared. He drank only from bottles opened in his immediate presence. His inner circle, the 4 men seated at his table in a loose, unobtrusive diamond formation, were not hired muscle. They were the last surviving members of his original war council, men bound to him by blood oaths sworn over the Quran and shared atrocities. They were armed, of course. Volkov's analysts had identified the subtle bulges beneath their jackets. 2 Glock 9s, an Austrian Steyr M9, and, with a touch of grim irony, a Russian Makarov PM. A direct assault was a fantasy. A sniper shot was impossible. The palace's grand arched windows were bomb-proofed ballistic glass, and the sight lines were a geometric nightmare of colonnades, fountains, and ancient plane trees. Poison was a fool's game against a man who suspected it in every glass of water. So, Zarya 7 had been tasked with the impossible. They weren't going to poison his food or his drink. They were going to poison the very air he breathed. The plan was a symphony of audacity. It was born 6 months prior in a sealed, lead-lined laboratory at the FSB's secretive Yasenevo facility. It relied on a cocktail of esoteric chemistry, microengineering, and deep-cover human intelligence. The centerpiece of this symphony was a substance designated Kolod 7, Cold 7. It wasn't a gas in the conventional sense. It was a complex, synthetic neuroinhibitor aerosol, a ligand-gated ion channel antagonist, an ultrafine, invisible mist of engineered molecules designed to cross the blood-brain barrier and temporarily sever the synaptic bridge between conscious intent and physical action. It didn't induce sleep, which would trigger immediate alarms. Instead, it created a state of profound, waking lethargy, a blissful and highly suggestible confusion. Victims would feel a pleasant warmth spread through their limbs, a comforting heaviness behind their eyes. Thoughts would slow to a syrupy crawl, and the perception of time would warp and stretch. They would become placid, docile, as easily led as children half-roused from a dream. The genius of Kolod 7, its operational beauty, was its brutally short half-life. Within 60 minutes, it broke down into harmless, untraceable compounds of carbon, hydrogen, and nitrogen in the bloodstream. It was the perfect ghost agent for a ghost operation. But delivery was the Gordian knot. Venting it through the HVAC system was too imprecise. It would affect the kitchen staff, the band, and could be defeated by unpredictable air currents. A canister was too crude, too loud. The solution, the stroke of cold genius, had come from Dr. Anya Petrova, the mission's chief chemist, a woman with a mind like a diamond and a heart, Volkov suspected, to match. She had identified the one element of any lavish banquet that was ubiquitous, ornate, and utterly ignored: the table centerpieces. For the past week, Volkov's primary infiltration asset, a deep-cover SVR agent seconded to the FSB and known only by the codename Layla, had been embedded with the event's exclusive catering company. Layla was a swallow, an agent of formidable intelligence and beauty, who had spent 3 years meticulously cultivating a relationship with the dissolute, cocaine-addicted son of the catering firm's owner. She was a phantom, her real identity buried under layers of fabricated history so deep that she probably had trouble remembering it herself. It was Layla who, with practiced charm and a portfolio of fake designs, had convinced the bride's mother that the proposed floral arrangements were tragically cliché. She presented them with a catalog from a boutique Parisian design house, a shell company that existed only on an encrypted server in a Moscow basement, showcasing magnificent wrought iron candelabras. Each of the 20 candelabras now gracing the linen-draped tables in that ballroom was a bespoke chemical weapon. The hollow, decorative scrollwork of patinated bronze concealed a network of capillary tubing. The heavy base, which appeared to be solid iron, was a machined housing for a canister of compressed, inert nitrogen and a flexible bladder containing the Kolod 7 solution. The 5 candles atop each one were not wax. They were ceramic atomizers, their wicks a clever facade. In reality, they were piezoelectric nozzles, engineered to vibrate at an ultrasonic frequency, a pitch far beyond human hearing. When triggered by an encrypted, spread-spectrum radio signal, the nitrogen would force the Kolod 7 through the tubing and out the nozzles, dispersing it as an invisible, odorless, perfectly distributed mist that would hang in the air at precisely the head height of a seated guest. Volkov glanced at a secondary monitor. A schematic of the ballroom glowed in cool green lines. 20 dots, representing the candelabras, were spread across the floor plan. A 21st dot, the centerpiece on Basayev's table, glowed an ominous red. That one was special, its dosage calibrated to be 50% stronger to overwhelm the heightened metabolism and adrenaline-soaked systems of Basayev and his guards. All 21 devices were slaved to a single frequency-hopping signal that would be broadcast from this van on a tightly controlled burst between the 415.5 and 415.8 megahertz UHF bands. The trigger was a single, polished silver button on Volkov's console. He had morbidly nicknamed it the God button. "Status, Layla," he sub-vocalized into the tiny microphone taped to his throat, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. The reply came a second later, scrubbed clean of all inflection by layers of encryption, her voice a disembodied, unnaturally calm whisper in his earpiece. "All assets in place. Visual confirmed on target. He seems relaxed. The bride is cutting the cake. He finds it amusing." "The waitstaff?" Volkov probed, his gaze sweeping the monitors, tracking the movements of Orpheus and the other compromised staff. "As briefed, my team is beginning to clear the outer tables, feigning preparations for the dancing. They will be in the service corridors when you initiate." Layla's hand-picked team of waiters and busboys, all of them Turkish nationals on the FSB payroll, knew only that they were part of a security detail for a high-value individual. Their instructions were simple. At a specific time, clear the room, no questions asked. "Extraction team, status?" Volkov's eyes flicked to another screen, watching a GPS transponder disguised as a municipal service vehicle move slowly along the coastal road. "En route. Call it 6 minutes from initiation," came the steady voice of Pavel, leader of the two-man extraction unit. He and his partner, Sergei, were in a fully equipped ambulance, a late-model Mercedes-Benz Sprinter, stolen 2 days prior and refitted in a clandestine garage with reinforced panels and a souped-up engine. Dressed as paramedics, their medical kits were filled not with gauze and defibrillators, but with silenced Makarov pistols, flex cuffs, and a dose of Thorazine powerful enough to tranquilize a rhino, just in case Kolod 7 proved insufficient. Everything was set. The culmination of months of planning, billions of rubles, and a dozen calculated risks was now 30 seconds from its violent, silent birth. Volkov felt the familiar cold knot of adrenaline tighten in his gut. This was the 0 point, the moment where the pristine, godlike certainty of the plan collided with the messy, unpredictable chaos of reality. He had run 100 simulations. Power failure, a fire alarm, a clumsy guest knocking over a candelabra. But there were always the unknowns, the black swans that haunted every field commander's sleep. What if Basayev's constitution, forged in war and deprivation, was uniquely resistant? What if the Turkish intelligence service, the MIT, had their own team in play, watching the watchers? He crushed the doubts with the discipline of a lifetime. It was time. His hand, steady as stone, hovered over the silver button. He watched Basayev on the monitor. The wolf was raising his glass, preparing to offer a toast to the happy couple. His scarred face was split in a wide, triumphant grin, his teeth yellowed by decades of cheap, strong cigarettes. It was the face from Volkov's nightmares, the face of the man who had ordered children to be used as human shields. "Zarya 7, this is Control," Volkov said, his voice dropping to a near-inaudible murmur that was for the official mission recording. "Initiate Phase 3 on my mark. In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, mark. He pressed the button. It didn't click. It was a capacitive sensor, its surface cold and smooth beneath his thumb. For one heart-stopping, eternal second, nothing happened. The scene on the monitor remained frozen in its lavish perfection. Basayev was still talking, his voice an indistinct rumble picked up by the cufflink mic. Then Volkov saw it. A subtle, almost imperceptible shimmer in the air around the candelabra on Basayev's table. A faint heat haze distortion as the aerosol, infinitesimally cooler than the ambient air, displaced it. It was invisible to the human eye, but the camera's high-resolution sensor caught the minute refraction of light. Across the grand ballroom, 20 other silent, deadly plumes were rising, spreading, merging into a single, invisible ceiling of chemical persuasion. Volkov held his breath, his eyes glued to the mission timer on his screen. The operational parameters, calculated by Anya Petrova's supercomputers, predicted the first observable effects in 45 to 60 seconds. 30 seconds. Basayev finished his toast and took a long swallow of champagne. One of his bodyguards laughed at a shared joke, the sound a little too loud, a little too forced. 45 seconds. A woman at an adjacent table, resplendent in emeralds, fanned her face with a menu, a slight, confused frown creasing her brow. A man 2 tables away, a prominent Turkish industrialist, yawned, a wide, luxurious, jaw-cracking yawn that seemed to go on forever. The violinist in the string quartet on stage drew her bow across the strings, but the note was sour, her fingers suddenly clumsy on the fingerboard. 60 seconds. The change was no longer subtle. It was palpable, even through the electronic veil of the camera. The sharp, chaotic symphony of the banquet was softening, its edges blurring into a low, gentle hum. The crisp sound of laughter devolved into a drowsy murmur. A guest dropped his fork. It clattered onto his porcelain plate with a sound that, in the suddenly muffled room, seemed as loud as a gunshot, but no one flinched. The man simply stared down at the fork with a serene, detached curiosity, as if it were a strange and fascinating beetle. 75 seconds. Basayev blinked, a long, slow, reptilian blink. He shook his head once, a gesture of mild annoyance, as if trying to clear water from his ear. He turned to say something to the man beside him, but the words died on his lips, trailing off into a soft sigh. His hand, still holding the champagne flute, lowered slowly, almost gracefully, to the table. The obsidian chips of his eyes were losing their focus, a milky glaze of confusion creeping over them. "We have effect." Volkov breathed into his mic, the tension in his voice finally breaking. "Pavel, you are green. Go, go, go." The ambulance, parked in a service lane, roared to life. Its diesel engine was a sudden, violent intrusion into the night. On a drone feed, a thermal image from 2,000 feet, Volkov watched it race towards the palace's service entrance, its emergency lights flashing rhythmically in the ghostly white-hot / black-cold world of infrared, its sirens silent. Inside the ballroom, the scene was a surrealist painting come to life. It was not a room full of unconscious bodies. It was a tableau vivant of profound, chemically induced apathy. The guests were slumped in their chairs, their heads lolling, faint, dopey smiles on their faces, as if they were sharing a pleasant, collective dream. Some stared intently at the intricate patterns on the tablecloth. Basayev's elite bodyguards, the wolves who had guarded the wolf, were now lambs. One was tracing the scrollwork on the grip of his Steyr pistol with a fascinated finger, his mouth slightly agape. Another was slumped forward, his forehead resting on the table, his hand still wrapped around a bread roll. The service doors burst open, and Pavel and Sergei moved through them. They were a blur of dark blue paramedic uniforms, their movements economical and brutally efficient. They carried a collapsible gurney and oversized orange medical bags. They ignored the dreaming guests, their eyes locked on the red dot table. Volkov was their third eye, his voice a calm presence in their earpieces. Target is at your 12 o'clock. 4 tangos, fully neutralized. No signs of resistance. As Pavel reached the table, one of Basayev's men, a grizzled veteran with a prosthetic left hand, showed a flicker of vestigial resistance. Decades of ingrained training were fighting a desperate, losing battle against the chemical tide in his brain. He pushed himself halfway up, his eyes struggling to focus on the intruders. Who are you? He slurred, his good hand fumbling clumsily for the Makarov tucked in his waistband. Sergei, the younger of the two, didn't hesitate. His own silenced Makarov, a PSS Vul, coughed once, a sound no louder than a champagne cork being eased from a bottle. The captive piston cartridge design meant there was no muzzle flash, no audible report, just a faint metallic slide. The bodyguard collapsed back into his chair, a neat, dark hole appearing on his forehead, a final, surprised look on his face. It was a violation of the mission's prime directive, no overt violence. But it was a necessary one. A single, audible gunshot could shatter the chemical spell, bringing the entire operation crashing down in blood and chaos. They reached Basayev. The wolf of Grozny, the butcher of a generation, looked up at them with the wide, trusting, uncomprehending eyes of a child. "Is it time for the dancing?" he asked, his voice thick and slow, the Chechen accent heavy and slurred. "Yes, Aslan," Pavel said calmly, his voice a soothing baritone one might use on a frightened patient. "Time for a little dance." He and Sergei hoisted the heavy warlord from his chair and onto the gurney, their movements practiced and swift. They strapped him down. Basayev offered no resistance. He was humming a tune, a half-remembered Chechen folk song from his youth. "Extraction team is mobile. Package is secure," Pavel reported, his breath coming in short, controlled bursts as they wheeled the gurney towards the service exit. "Heading for the egress point." Volkov watched them move through the ballroom of sleeping dolls. It was a perfect exfiltration, a ghost team moving through a room of ghosts. He allowed himself a fraction of a second of pure professional satisfaction. It was then that a new voice, sharp with urgency, crackled in his ear. It was Anya Petrova, patched in from her own monitoring post in a hotel room across the Bosphorus. "Dmitri, we have a problem, a critical anomaly." Volkov's blood turned to ice. "Report." "The bride. I've been monitoring vitals on a random sampling of guests via high-resolution thermal imaging. Most show a predictable drop in heart rate and respiration. Standard Collod 7 response. But the bride, her core temperature is plummeting. Her heart rate is becoming dangerously erratic. Tachycardia followed by bradycardia. She must have a pre-existing condition, Dmitri. A rare metabolic anomaly, a severe allergy to one of the binding agents. Something our intelligence missed. The Collod 7 is reacting catastrophically with her biology. She's going into anaphylactic shock. Dmitri, she's dying." Volkov's eyes snapped to the high table on another monitor. The bride, a young woman in a cloud of white silk, was no longer smiling placidly. Her face was turning a blotchy, cyanotic blue. Her chest was heaving in ragged, desperate spasms. A thin line of foam appeared at her lips. "Can you counteract it?" he demanded, his voice a low snarl. Not from here. She needs a massive dose of epinephrine and a respirator immediately. If she dies, Dmitri, this stops being a quiet kidnapping. This becomes a mass poisoning at a high society wedding. The Turks will lock down the entire city, every port, every airport. Your team will never make it to the rendezvous. They will be caught, and this will be an international incident of the highest order. He was trapped. A perfect multi-million ruble operation undone by a random quirk of one person's biology. He had two choices, both of them catastrophic. Abort the exfiltration, order Pavel and Sergei to ditch Basayev and flee, sacrificing the entire objective and years of work. Or let the bride die and risk the entire team being captured or killed. "Layla," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Where are you?" "Service corridor, west wing. Preparing to egress as planned," she replied, her voice still a mask of calm, utterly unaware of the crisis unfolding yards away. "Negative. Change of plan. Go back. Go to the bride. Now." There was a half-second of stunned silence. "Dmitri, what's happening? What's wrong?" "The bride is having a severe allergic reaction to the agent. She is your new priority. You must save her." "Save her? With what? My skill set is linguistics and close-quarters combat, not emergency medicine." "In the ambulance," Volkov said, his mind racing, weaving a desperate new plan from the threads of disaster. "Pavel, confirm. Your primary medical kit. Do you have a crash kit? Epinephrine auto-injectors?" "Confirmed." Pavel's voice grunted from the speeding ambulance, the sound of the engine in the background. "Standard paramedic loadout. We have EpiPens, atropine, the works." "Pavel, at the service entrance. Drop your primary medical bag. Kick it out the door. Do not stop. Do it now." "Sergei, you continue with the package to the rendezvous. You are on your own." "Layla, you will retrieve that bag. You will find the epinephrine auto-injector. You will administer it to the bride. You will save her life." It was a gamble of insane proportions. He was sending his most valuable deep cover asset back into the operational zone. He was splitting his extraction team, leaving the primary objective guarded by a single man. He was risking everything on her ability to perform a medical procedure in a room full of witnesses who could wake up at any moment. "Dmitri, they will see me," Layla protested, her voice tight with professional fear for the first time in the 3 years he had known her. "When the drug wears off, they will remember my face. My cover will be blown. 3 years of work, my life." "Your cover is already gone," Volkov said, the words like chips of ice. "The moment that room wakes up and the bride is dead, this entire event is compromised. Your only path to survival is to create a new narrative. You are no longer an FSB agent. You are the heroic catering manager who saved the bride's life. You saw her choking. You knew first aid. You found a medical kit that some panicked paramedics dropped in the confusion. You will become a hero. And heroes, Layla, are not suspected of being spies." He watched on the fractured mosaic of his screens as his desperate strategy unfolded in real time. The ambulance screeched to a halt at the service door. Pavel kicked a heavy, bright orange bag onto the pavement before the vehicle sped off into the Istanbul night. A moment later, Layla, a slim dark shadow in her black uniform, darted out, snatched the bag, and vanished back inside. The cufflink camera was useless, its owner having slumped under a table. Volkov switched to the venue's own security cameras, a low-resolution feed they had piggybacked. He saw Layla re-enter the ballroom. She moved with a frantic, focused grace, her face a mask of pure determination. She reached the bride, who was now barely breathing. With hands trained to field strip a weapon, not administer aid, She tore open the medical kit, found the EpiPen, and plunged the needle deep into the bride's thigh, right through the expensive silk of her gown. For an agonizing 10 seconds that stretched into an eternity, nothing happened. Then, the bride took a huge, shuddering gasp of air, a drowning person breaking the surface. Color, faint at first, then vibrant, began to return to her cheeks. Her eyes fluttered open, filled with confusion, but alive. Layla had done it. She had pulled the entire operation back from the abyss. Volkov switched his attention back to the exfiltration. Sergei was reporting his progress through the chaotic Istanbul traffic, a calm, steady litany of street names. The package, Basayev, was quiet. The rendezvous was a rusty, Panamanian-flagged cargo ship, the MV Odessa, captained by a GRU veteran on the state pension. They were scheduled to slip their moorings in 30 minutes. Back in the ballroom, the first tendrils of consciousness were returning. The Kolod 7 was dissipating. People were stirring, groaning, rubbing their eyes, as if waking from a deep sleep. They awoke to a scene of bizarre disarray. A dropped fork, an overturned glass of wine. And in the center of it all, a heroic catering manager, tending to the pale but breathing bride. The narrative was setting like concrete. A strange fainting spell, perhaps a gas leak from the kitchen. And in the midst of the panic, this brave young woman had saved the day. No one would remember the two paramedics. No one would remember seeing Aslan Basayev wheeled out. Their chemically addled minds would fill in the gaps with the most logical, the most heroic explanation. Volkov allowed a small, tight, humorless smile. It was done. All Zarya 7 assets, egress to secondary extraction points, he ordered. Radio silence from this point on. One by one, he shut down the monitors. The glowing screens went dark, plunging the van into a profound, welcome blackness. He was a ghost again, preparing to melt back into the shadows of the sprawling city. An hour later, Volkov stood on the vibrating deck of the MV Odessa as it churned north towards the Black Sea. The lights of Istanbul were a glittering, receding smear on the horizon. Below deck, in a specially prepared cell welded into the hold, Aslan Basayev was sleeping off the effects of the Thorazine, his long journey to a Moscow courtroom already begun. Pavel and Sergei were silently cleaning their weapons, their faces impassive granite. The mission was a success, a legendary success that would be dissected and studied for years in the academies at Yasenevo. His encrypted satellite phone, a bulky, hardened granite M, buzzed in his pocket. It was a text-only message from a number that didn't exist, routed through a dozen proxy servers. It was from the general. The message was short, the Cyrillic letters stark white against the black screen. Exceptional work. Prize is secure. A new legend is born for the service tonight. But legends create complications. The hero of the banquet is now a liability. She knows too much. She has a face. Sanitize the asset. Confirm when complete. Volkov stared at the message, the phone feeling unnaturally heavy in his hand. Sanitize the asset. A clean, sterile, bureaucratic euphemism for the dirtiest of jobs. Layla. The woman who had given 3 years of her life to this operation. Living a lie. Sleeping with a man she despised. The woman who, an hour ago, had single-handedly saved his mission from catastrophic failure through sheer nerve. His orders were to have her killed. She had become too famous, too visible. A hero could be questioned by the press, interviewed by the police. A hero had her picture taken. A hero was a loose end. He thought of her face, of that brief, fleeting moment of fear in her voice, when he had ordered her back into the ballroom. He had promised her a new narrative, a path to survival. He had lied. He had used her courage as an operational tool, knowing, even as he gave the order, that her very success would sign her death warrant. It was the ultimate cruel paradox of their profession. To be exceptional was to be a threat. To be memorable was to be a ghost that needed exorcising. He walked to the ship's rusty railing. The cold sea air whipped at his face, thick with the smell of salt and diesel fumes. He could refuse the order. He could try to warn her, to give her a chance to run. But that would make him a traitor. The system that had forged him, the system he served with a monk's devotion, did not tolerate sentiment. It demanded absolute, cold-blooded efficiency. A loose end was a loose end. A risk was a risk. And the work was never, ever finished. He pulled out the phone again, his thumb hovering over the keypad. He considered the cold, pragmatic calculus of his profession. Layla's life versus the long-term security of the state's intelligence apparatus. To the general, it wasn't even a choice. It was simply closing a file. In his world, heroes and monsters often met the same end, erased from the board with equal dispassion. Basaev, the monster, was now a captive. Layla, the hero, was now a target. Both were merely assets to be managed. With a deep, hollow feeling in the pit of his stomach, the familiar emotional vacuum that always followed the adrenaline, Dmitry Volkov typed his reply. It was only 2 words. 2 words to extinguish the life of the woman who had just saved his. "Will comply." He pressed send and watched the lights of the city that held her dissolve into the unforgiving darkness of the sea. The wolf was in a cage, but the hunt, he knew, was not over. A new file would be opened tomorrow. A new target. A new city. For people like him, the hunt was never over.